All right, in this second video, we're going to start going through the optional benefits that many organizations provide but are no longer required. So this first video, this is mostly going to be about retirement savings. So I'm just going to put this graphic up there. This is in the book, but it might be really helpful for you when we're talking about the different kinds of retirement plans that organizations can provide. They can either have defined benefits plans or defined contribution plans. If I were you, if you don't know the difference between these two, I would mark this in your notes somewhere. Defined benefits plans are what our grandparents tended to get or our great grandparents, and this is what we called a pension. These were promised benefits that you would know when you retired how much money you were going to get per month. Those are no longer popular. Most of us will never have one of those. It depends. So there are still a few businesses and government entities that give them out. Most of us will have what are called defined contribution plans. These are like 401ks, or there's some other plans we'll talk about in this video where there's a defined contribution. Your employer is telling you exactly how much they're going to put in, but how much you'll get out per month when you retire really depends on how well you did in terms of investing that money. So it's really not on the employer anymore to guarantee some kind of amount. So let's go through these a little bit more, and this will explain why we don't really have defined benefit plans as much anymore as we do defined contribution plans. So with a defined benefit plan, as I said, employers promise to provide a specific level of retirement pension. This was the defined benefit, the benefit being what you got when you retired. This amount was either a fixed dollar amount saying like you would get $300 per month when you retired at the age of 65, or some percent of earnings. You would get 5% of your earnings. That sounds very low, at 65. That amount increased with years of seniority. So the longer you were at a job, the more money you would get, or the more that defined benefit was worth when you retired. And you have to imagine that these were very popular plans, kind of post Great Depression, post World War II, when people were staying in jobs throughout their careers, like they were in the same organization for their whole career. Then you could really get a good defined benefit for retirement. And retirement didn't really exist before the Great Depression either. A lot of people didn't live long enough to retire, and they often didn't have a lot of money to save. So this was like a way to, as people's lifespans were increasing, to give them something for retirement. Firms or employers determined how much they were going to put into these plans on an actuarially defined benefit formula. That means that essentially they had professionals who used statistics to figure out how much they needed to invest to meet this defined benefit promise that they gave their employees. Current payments would yield future pension benefits. That's why you had to have this whole formula. This means, though, that the employer takes on all of the investment risk. So if the yield wasn't the amount promised, so say they put in money and based on their formula, this is how much they were supposed to put in, and 40 years from now, it doesn't make the kind of, it's not worth the amount they need for the benefit that they guaranteed employees when they retired, then there's going to be some funding difficulties for those organizations. And our book talks about what some of these organizations had to do. They had to sell off their defined benefit plans. Some of them went under, some were able to pay their employees. It became a mess. There were lots of different ways that employers dealt with this. One big way that they dealt with this was to just get rid of defined benefit plans, and then they went to mostly defined contribution plans. And that's the kind of plans most of us will have. This is when an employer makes provisions for contributions to an account set up for each participating employee. So the payout that a worker gets when they retire is based on their own contributions, their employer's contributions, and then any gains or losses in their stock investments from the time that they put that money into that stock, and then when they took it out of that stock. Here, the employee takes on all of the risk of the investment. And so you have to hope the economy and the stock market is doing really well when you retire to make sure that you get kind of maximize the amount that you get. But if the account loses money, it's the employee who loses their retirement income. The employer didn't guarantee anything. And so it's much easier for organizations to do this because they didn't guarantee anything. They don't have any funding difficulties when things don't work out for employees. Unfortunately, that means employees can't always guarantee that they'll have enough money from these defined contribution plans. And so we'll talk about what else you can do then to make sure that you do have enough money for retirement. There are three popular forms of defined contribution plans that we'll talk about. 401ks, which are the defined contribution plans for private for-profit companies. 403Bs, which is what I have, and those are for public schools and churches. And then if you work for state and local government, you'll get a 457B. Those accounts all operate very similarly. They just have some different laws behind them, and that's why they're numbered differently. We also have employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs, and then profit sharing plans that can also be used for retirement accounts. Two things I want to emphasize really fast before we go through those different kinds of accounts. One, if your employer matches a contribution to some amount, you should be maximizing that contribution as long as you can. So if your employer, let's say they'll match up to 5%, that means every month or every paycheck, you should be paying 5% into your retirement account so that you can get that 5% from your employer. That's free money they're giving you, free earnings that you would get by maximizing that account. It's just that you actually have to maximize your retirement investment into their account to get that amount of money. You will want to look into the vesting period, which we'll talk about shortly, but that's how long you have to work at that employer to get some or all of the money out that the employer has contributed to the plan when you leave. The second thing is contribute as early as you can in your life. And this could be to a 401k, but I would also say it could be to an IRA, which we'll talk about in a later slide. Any kind of retirement account you can. The earlier you contribute, the more that money will be worth by the time you retire than if you wait. And I just want to show here, they have different kinds of portfolios. The dark one is the one I'm betting most of you will go through, since I think all of us are probably under retirement age at this point, where you're investing a lot in stocks. Maybe you have some bonds and some cash. Bonds and cash don't make nearly as much as stocks. So when you're younger, you can invest more money in stocks with the hopes that you'll make more money over time. And then as you get closer to retirement, you put more money into bonds and cash because you want to guarantee that in a few years, there will still be money in your accounts to start drawing your retirement. But look at this. If you start at the age from 21 to 29, how much more your money is worth, $5,000 annually is worth when you retire than when you start at 31 or 39. That's not much difference. It's only a decade, maybe 2 decades at best, but it's almost a fourth of the amount a decade later if you start investing later in life. So invest as early as you can as well. So let's go through some of these plans. 401ks, again, that's the most common kind, but some of you might work in organizations that have ESOPs, or employee stock ownership plans. These are organizations that are publicly owned. So they have stocks, they're shareholders, and what they're doing here is they're allowing employees to own stock in that company as part of the retirement plan or the sole retirement plan for employees that's offered by the employer. The company makes a tax-deductible contribution of stock shares or cash to buy stock into a trust. So this is different from just a stock ownership plan. You can have employee-owned organizations where employees have the opportunity to invest in the organization, but don't have to. Here, this money is set aside specifically in a trust to buy shares for employees for their retirement. So this is why it's considered a retirement plan. When an ESOP is used as a pension, meaning it has a defined benefit, the employer receives the cash at retirement based on the stock value at the time, so the time that when they retire. So in that case too, employers are not liable for any changes in that stock price by the time they get to retirement for an employee. One major disadvantage is that many employees are reluctant to bet most of their future retirement income on just one investment source. Most people are going to diversify their portfolio, meaning they're going to invest money in many different kinds of companies. That way, if any one or a few of those companies don't do well, by the time they retire, they won't have lost all their retirement savings. They'll be able to count on the other companies that were growing and have made money over time. And a lot of this goes back to, if any of you remember Enron or have heard of Enron, and if you haven't, I would stop this video and go Google right now really quickly and find out what happened. But essentially, Enron was an oil company, or kind of an energy company in Texas. Some of their leadership committed fraud. And by committing fraud, once they were found out, their company went under. They lost all their money. But many of their employees, their entire retirement savings was in an ESOP where they owned stocks or shares of Enron. So when Enron went under, they lost their entire retirement savings. That made many people very wary of putting all their money into their organization's shareholder or stock plan. So a lot of companies now are also offering 401ks where there's more diversification of investments so that people can also save retirement money that way too. We also have profit sharing plans, which can be considered a retirement plan, but also can just be considered kind of an incentive plan, but not necessarily for retirement. Here, what happens is when the company makes money, profits, they share those profits with their employees. To make it a retirement plan, it's considered a deferred compensation plan because the compensation or the amount that you're promising to employees is whatever those profits are that quarter or however often that they're investing those profits. But to make it a retirement plan, it has to be open to all employees. Sometimes it's only open to like top leadership or people who've worked a certain number of years, in which case it's not considered a retirement plan because it's not open to all employees. And then it has to meet some non-discrimination tests that are set up by federal law and the courts. The employer advantage with a profit sharing plan is that there's a tax deduction for your contributions when you're not paying out benefits. So every time you're putting in profits in, when you're reinvesting it essentially into the retirement accounts for your employees, you don't have to pay taxes on those. For those of you who maybe aren't working right now or would like additional savings, because it does feel very weird to let your employer determine if you're going to have enough money or not for retirement along with your Social Security payments, you can have what are called individual retirement accounts or IRAs. And there's lots of different kinds of IRAs. You may see commercials on TV, for example, or on social media for companies like I have an account with Edward Jones, lots of financial planners who can help you set up IRAs and then help you put contributions into your IRA. These are tax-favored retirement savings plans that individuals can establish themselves. They don't have to be part of the workforce to even establish one of these. It's not related to your employer at all, so your employers don't necessarily put contributions into these. You can put your own money into an IRA whenever you have money available to put into it. They're usually used just to store wealth accumulated in other retirement vehicles rather than as a way to build new wealth. And let me give you an example of that. I've always had one of these ever since I was an undergrad. And I put in money when I could, but I wasn't making a lot of money as an undergrad. I worked, on campus. I didn't have a huge paycheck. But my very first job out of school, I worked at Texas A&M University, and I was in their 403(b) plan because I worked at a public university. Well, when I left that job, I took my money out of the retirement account and I put it into my Roth IRA. And so that I still had all of the money I had put in. I was invested in the system, so I didn't get what my employer was going to put into the system for me, but I did get out what I invested, and I was required to as a public employee. It wasn't a choice that I had, but I was able then to put it into a different retirement account so I could use it later. So that's what this means for an IRA. I would definitely have tell all of you to look into that as another vehicle for your retirement. I also want you to be aware that there are laws around these different kinds of retirement accounts. The Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, we just call it ERISA, was passed in 1974. And part of this is, think about 1974 as a time when we start transitioning from defined benefit to defined contribution plans. We're starting to have employers who are having problems meeting those defined benefit plans. So this law was passed to protect the interest of 100 million active participants of employer retirement plans and stimulate the growth of such plans so that more employers would actually offer some kind of retirement plans. It also set up the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation to guarantee a basic benefit even if someone's retirement plan went under because, say, their company went bankrupt before they even got to retirement age. It also set up what we call vesting and portability. Vesting, I mentioned just before, that's how long you have to work with an employer before you can pull out any payments that they've made to the retirement system under your name. So usually that vesting period, sometimes it's immediate. It's more common to be somewhere between 1 and 5 years. You have to work that long at your employer before you can start pulling out all the contributions. Some have grades so that like after you've worked 2 years, you'll get 20% out. After 3 years, 40% up till you can get the full amount out after 5 or 6 years. And then the portability means that if you leave your job, you can pull out what you put into the retirement account. And if you're vested in the system, what your employer also put in, and you can put it into a different kind of retirement account like an IRA so that you can continue to benefit from that money and keep investing it, but you don't have to be tied to a job that you no longer have, 30 years later or 40 years later when you retire. So how do organizations determine how much retirement income to provide their employees? You have to think about these 5 questions, and these are 5 very large questions. So these are like very strategic questions that this wouldn't just be HR's responsibility. This would be leadership's responsibility, top leadership, to kind of figure out what level of retirement compensation would the company like to set as a target in terms of pre-retirement savings? Should Social Security payments be considered when thinking about what that amount should be? Should other post-retirement income sources be integrated with pension payments? This could be things like Medicare or other kinds of benefits they might provide. How should you factor seniority into payment formula? So should people who've been longer with that employer get more money in terms of their retirement? And then what can the organization ultimately afford? That budget will really matter then in determining how much you can provide employees. But this is usually something very attractive to employees, something I would suggest you ask about in interviews, if they don't tell you more about their retirement plan, but usually employers will, because this is something that can attract and retain employees for a very long time.